Hi, glad to see you back again. It's Terry again. Today we're going to talk about an idea titled Evaluating Formulas. Now remember that words mean what they mean. If you've ever worked on a job before and you've had a job evaluation, what they do is they ask you questions, they watch you work, but basically what they're doing is they're trying to find out what value you have to the company so they can decide whether to give you an increase in pay, whether to keep you, whether to let you go, but they're looking for the value you have for the company. So when you start thinking about the idea of evaluating formulas, what we're going to be looking for is find the value. Now the problem is sometimes we have things, for example, like this. The area of a rectangular figure is the length times the width. Well, if I ask you what the value is, are you going to know what to do? Well, that's just the formula. I mean, there is no value spoken of there. It's just a formula. So when we're going to evaluate a formula, it's got to deal with numbers. And that means we're going to have some information. So if I have, for example, I tell you I've got this rectangle, and say the rectangle is 12 by 4. Now I've got some actual numbers, and I can find the area of a rectangle with these dimensions. Now what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the A. And at this point in time, I don't have a numerical value for it, so I have to continue to write down the A. That's what I'm looking for. But what I have been given is a numerical value for the length and a numerical value for the width. So I can replace those letters, those variables, with the numbers that they represent. When I do that, that gives me information that I can then use to actually find a value for the area of this rectangle, for this particular rectangle. Because it says right here, from this formula, that all I have to do is multiply those two numbers together. And when I do that, I get 48. That gives me a numerical value for that formula. Okay, so that's the idea of what we're talking about. We're talking about taking formulas or equations and using the information we do know to evaluate that particular equation or formula for something we don't know, but we want to know. Okay, so that's the basic idea, and now let's look at some examples of how we might run into using this. Let's say I have an equation, and this equation looks like this. Now, one of the things that's excuse me, extremely helpful is to understand what these equations are saying. So try to think this way because it will help you. This says that this number, whatever it is, will be found by multiplying 2 times some other number and then adding 6 to that product. If that's what you're seeing when you look at it, then it's going to be a whole lot simpler for you when you have to evaluate this equation. For example, if you're told that x is equal to 1, and you're asked to find out, to evaluate this for y, or basically what we're saying is just find out what y has to be, then you take that very little. Remember what I said, this is 2 times some number plus 6. I'm going to add 6 to that product. Well, if I tell you the number that I'm thinking of, you look here and you say the number is equal to 1, and that's the kind of thing you want to get to where you're looking for, then I can say, okay, y is equal to 2 times 1 plus 6. Is that something I can use to find the value of y? Absolutely. All I have to do is take 2 times 1, which we can handle. That's equal to 2. And then I add 6. So in other words, y is equal to 8. 8 is the only number that I could get to make this equation true when x is equal to 1. Those two numbers have to go together with this particular equation to make it work. So in this case, 8 is the thing that I was looking for. So I evaluated that equation for y. Now, there are a lot of different type situations where I might run into something like that. In some very practical way. Let's say that I'm going to build a livestock pen. Maybe you're in 4-H or something and you're going to have some animals. And you know that you've got an area you want to put a pen in, and it has a width. You've got a spot that you can put that's 12 feet wide, and you've got 80 feet of fencing. Okay? So you think about the idea here. Now, a pen, to do any good with animals, has to go around the outside edge. Well, what did we call that? That's the perimeter. So we remember this idea, the perimeter, and there were 2 lengths and 2 widths. So 2 times the length plus 2 times the width is what the perimeter is. So I have a formula here, and I'm going to evaluate that formula given the information that I have. Now, it's important that you look at the information that you actually have and work with that. So when I see the 12, that's 12 foot wide, I know where that goes. So I don't have any problems there. That's going to be 2 times 12. Because that's what the width is, and that's what that formula says. Now, when I think of the 80 feet of fencing, I think, oh, wait a minute, that's the distance around the outsides, because that's where the fence goes. So that means the 80 goes over here where the P is, because that is, the fence is the perimeter of that particular rectangle. And then what I'm left with is the 2L. Well, what that allows me to do is it allows me to find how long my pen can be. L. I have an equation. I just solved the equation that I got by putting in the information that I had, put it where it was supposed to be, put the W there and the P there, and I got an equation for L. I can solve that equation and I can know exactly how long my pen's going to be. So I just solved the equation. There aren't any parentheses, no like terms. You might want to combine those two so you just have one number to work with. Is there any addition or subtraction I need to do? Well, I look for plus or minus, and there is a plus, so I have to undo that by subtracting. I have to subtract from both sides. Those cancel, as they always will, remember. And over here I've got 80 minus 24, which is 56. Last thing I do, or the next thing I do, is check to see if there's any multiplication or division. And sure enough, this is 2 times L. What undoes multiplication? Division. So I'm going to divide. But with this idea of balance again, remember, if I do something, anything to an equation, I want to keep it in balance which is what's necessary to have the equal sign, I have to divide that by 2 as well. Those will cancel, leaving the L by itself, which is what I wanted. And over here, 26 divided by 2, or 56 divided by 2, if I say what it looks like, okay, I'm going to get L is equal to 28. So, if I've got a pen, it's got 80 feet of fence around it, it's in a spot that's 12 feet wide, I know with that much fencing, I can actually get a pen that's going to be 28 feet long. So I evaluated this formula to find some information that's useful for me. And that's what this is all about when we talk about evaluating. Now, remember when we're talking about this kind of thing, we only use variables when we don't know the numbers. And when we start out with a general situation when we're talking about perimeter, we don't know what those things are in the beginning when we just have the formula. But when we get in a particular situation, then we have a specific set of information. That's when we use the numbers. When we know what they are, why in the world would we continue to use a letter when we know a number that represents the same thing? It's fantastic that we know we can use a letter to represent a number, but why in the world would we? Because we know how to work with numbers. We learn how to kind of deal with variables, but it doesn't help us get any information. So as soon as we get a number that we know specifically, then we replace the letter that it represents with the number. And as we do that, we end up with equations that involve a number that we still don't know. But because we got everything out of the way, we can now find the value of that letter. So it's a fantastic tool that helps us get a lot of things done. And you can see here, if you had to plan and you were going to put in what do you call it, pen? All right, we're going to put a pen in there. We got 80 feet of fencing, and we've got a spot we can put it that's 12 feet wide. You can know exactly how big that pen's going to be. It's going to be 12 by 28. That is something that's really useful to know. Let's just do one other quick one, and then we'll let it go. Another situation where we have two things. Most of the world measures temperatures in centigrade. In the United States, we do it in Fahrenheit. Well, if you have a friend or relative that lives somewhere else and you want to talk about temperatures and everything, the temperatures that they're thinking about are not going to be the same as the ones you're thinking about. So we have here a formula. This formula tells us how we can relate temperatures. So, if you're talking to a friend and you tell them that it's 77 degrees where you are, they're going to think it's horribly hot. So if you want to be able to communicate with them and have them know exactly what the temperature is in words and in numbers that they can understand, then you're going to have to convert your Fahrenheit reading to their centigrade reading. Well, this is a formula that tells how centigrade readings and Fahrenheit readings are, how they compare. So you got a 77 degree reading, and that's Fahrenheit, and you want to tell them what the temperature is going to be, then you just simply take this conversion formula. We're looking for C. We don't know what it is. We do know what the Fahrenheit is. So we put the 77 in there because that's what the F is. It's the reading in Fahrenheit. Now once we have done that, we can evaluate the resulting equation and find what centigrade will be at that point. So we just do this, and we do what's in parentheses first. That's the rule, still is. 77 minus 32 is going to be 45. Okay, now we have a fraction here, and remember when we work with fractions, if we make everything look like a fraction, it makes it a little easier for our brain to tell what to do. When we multiply fractions, what's the first thing we do if we're smart? Simplify. So we start here with a 5. Are there any 5s in the denominator? Since it's in the numerator, no. Come down to the 9. Are there any factors of 9 anywhere in the numerator? There are. So we divide out that common factor, and now we're ready to multiply because there's only 1s in the denominator. And when we multiply the numerators together, we get 25. We multiply the denominators together, we get 1. So when it's 77 degrees where you are, you can tell your friend or your relative that it's 25 degrees, and then they will understand. They will understand what that temperature represents, and they'll be able to do it. So this is just an example, but it's how we use the idea of evaluating formulas. So just get used to the idea. It's a fairly simple process. We just put in the numbers we know, and then we look for the numbers that we don't know in the resulting equations. That's it. It's not very complicated, especially if you can do things one thing at a time. Okay? Thanks for coming. See you next time.